She walked down the aisle believing it was love, but for him it was just a cruel bet. What neither of them expected was that this fake marriage would cost them everything and give them a chance at something real. Hello, my friends. Before we begin this amazing story, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and how your day is going, all right? And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes sounded less like a celebration and more like 1,000 tiny, mocking bells to Amelia Hayes. From her vantage point near the towering, ice-sculpted swan, she watched the glittering scrum of New York's elite ebb and flow across the opulent ballroom of the Astor. Every breath felt like a performance, a careful calibration of poise she did not feel. She instinctively adjusted the bodice of her custom-made ivory gown, a creation of silk and intricate beadwork that felt less like a luxurious garment and more like a beautifully constructed suit of armor, shielding her from the curious, appraising glances that followed her every move. Across the room, cocooned in a circle of his groomsmen, Liam Sterling, her husband of precisely 3 hours and 12 minutes, threw his head back and laughed. It was a sound engineered for rooms like this, rich, resonant, and utterly confident, yet to Amelia's ears, it was as hollow as the cavernous space above them. He was the sun around which this entire universe orbited, and she was the newly discovered, oddly shaped moon caught in his gravitational pull. One of his friends, the one with the cruel, knowing smile she recognized instantly as Julian Vance, caught her eye. He lifted his glass in a silent toast, a gesture that carried not congratulations, but the sharp, venomous sting of a shared secret, a taunt disguised as a courtesy. Amelia's stomach clenched into a tight, cold knot, the single glass of champagne she'd nursed all evening threatening to rebel. She could almost hear the phantom echo of their conversation, the snickering, testosterone-fueled words of the wager that had ensnared her, placing her in the center of this gilded, suffocating cage. Her small beaded clutch buzzed insistently, a welcome distraction from the polished, predatory smiles. She slipped away into a small alcove behind a monstrous floral arrangement of white orchids and lilies, the air thick with their funereal scent. The screen of her phone cast a stark, blue-white glow on her face, a beacon of her grim reality in the midst of the carefully curated fantasy. It was a text from her younger sister, Chloe. "Any news on Dad's surgery fund?" Dr. Evans called again. "They need the deposit by Friday to hold his spot." Amelia's fingers tightened on the phone, the smooth casing cold against her skin. Every word was a needle prick to her conscience, a reminder of the monumental stakes of the charade she was performing. This wasn't a fairy tale wedding. It was a high-stakes transaction, a desperate last-ditch gamble where her dignity was the buy-in and her heart was the collateral. She typed back a reply, her thumbs moving with a speed born of practice and anxiety. "Everything is handled, don't worry. Just focus on Dad. I love you." She hit send before she could second-guess the lie. It was a lie of omission, a lie of necessity, a lie that tasted like ash in her mouth. She looked back out at the magnificent ballroom, at the man who was now her husband, and understood with chilling clarity that for the next 6 months, her life was no longer her own. It belonged to the contract, to the bet, and to the crushing, astronomical cost of a father's life in a country where healthcare was a privilege, not a right. From his position at the center of the storm, Liam Sterling felt a familiar, gnawing emptiness that no amount of back-slapping congratulations or vintage champagne could fill. He was playing the part of the triumphant groom to perfection, his smile practiced, his laughter effortless, his charisma a well-honed tool that opened doors and closed deals. Yet, beneath the bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, he felt the suffocating weight of his father's legacy, a ghost that haunted every boardroom and shareholder meeting. The Patek Philippe on his wrist, his father's watch, felt heavier than usual. a constant ticking reminder of the legendary man he could never quite measure up to. This marriage, this audacious, insane bet, was just another reckless gambit in a long line of them, a desperate attempt to project an image of stability he was far from feeling. He needed the Abernathy deal to close, to pull Sterling Properties from the precipice his own risk-taking had led it to, and securing that investment required him to be someone he wasn't, a settled, conservative family man. He glanced across the room and saw Amelia retreating behind a wall of flowers, the stark light of her phone illuminating a profile that was both strong and deeply troubled. He saw not a bride, but a strategic asset, a brilliant but financially cornered architect who was the perfect, unconventional solution to his very public problem. A pang of something uncomfortable, something that felt dangerously like guilt, pricked at him. He swiftly suppressed it, burying it under layers of pragmatism. She's getting what she wants out of this too, he reminded himself, the thought a cold, hard stone in his gut. This was business, and in business, sentiment was a liability. As Amelia tried to merge back into the periphery of the celebration, her path was inadvertently blocked by the very circle she sought to avoid. Liam's friends, a collection of handsome, shark-eyed men from the same privileged world of finance and real estate, were ribbing him about his newfound domesticity. She tried to slip past, offering a tight, polite smile, but Julian Vance's voice, slick with insinuation, cut through the noise and stopped her cold. "Quite the investment, Sterling," one of the men, he commented, clapping Liam on the shoulder with a heavy hand. "Settling down, who would have thought?" Julian, who had been watching Amelia's approach with an unnerving intensity, let a slow, condescending smirk spread across his face. He leaned in toward Liam, his voice just loud enough for Amelia to hear over the string quartet. "It's a bold move, I'll give you that. But tell me, Liam, is she worth the 50 million? The number hung in the air, grotesque and obscene. It was the valuation of the deal Julian had wagered against him, the price tag on his humiliation. But to Amelia, in that moment, it sounded like her own value, her price. The laughter of the men around them suddenly sounded distorted and cruel. The opulent room began to feel airless, and the beautiful armor of her dress felt like it was shrinking, threatening to crush her. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, her eyes locking with Liam's across the small space, searching for something, anything, a denial, a defense, a flicker of remorse. She found nothing but a cool, unreadable mask. The memory of that moment was still seared into her mind a week later, as she stood in the sterile, silent expanse of Liam's Tribeca penthouse. The apartment was less a home and more a monument to minimalist wealth, a landscape of polished concrete floors, vast panes of glass, and brutally uncomfortable Italian furniture that looked better than it felt. It was a space that tolerated human presence rather than welcoming it. Her own boxes of belongings seemed like a jarring intrusion, a splash of untidy, colorful reality in a black and white photograph. This was the first rule of their contract, the forced intimacy of cohabitation. Liam had been surprisingly, if coldly, accommodating, gesturing to a suite of rooms on the opposite side of the penthouse. "This wing is yours," he had stated, his tone that of a hotel concierge. "We have a housekeeper who comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. She'll handle everything. My office is off limits. Other than that, feel free to exist." The awkwardness between them was a tangible entity, a third person in the room. They moved around each other with the careful, stilted choreography of strangers, their conversations limited to logistical necessities about upcoming events they were required to attend as a loving couple. It was in these quiet, lonely moments that Amelia felt the full, crushing weight of her decision. She would wander through the vast, impersonal space late at night, her father's worried face swimming in her mind, and wonder if she had sold more of herself than she could ever hope to buy back. Liam found himself in an equally disquieting state of adjustment. He was accustomed to solitude, to a life curated to his exact specifications. The sudden presence of Amelia in his space was a constant, low-level disruption he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the physical presence of her books stacked on a side table, or the faint scent of jasmine and tea that now lingered in the hallway. It was the psychic weight of her existence. He would hear the soft click of her keyboard from her room late at night and feel an unwelcome jolt of curiosity. He had chosen her for her intelligence, for the backbone he'd witnessed when he'd first seen her, but he had expected that intelligence to remain neatly contained within the parameters of their agreement. He had not expected it to spill into his life, to make him question the sterile perfection he had built around himself. One evening, driven by a restless energy after a tense conference call, he walked past his home office, the door of which he usually kept locked. It was slightly ajar. He pushed it open to find Amelia standing before the large drafting table where the blueprints for his flagship project, the Sterling Tower, were laid out. He felt a surge of irritation. "I thought I made it clear this room was off limits," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Amelia didn't startle. She turned slowly, a red pencil held loosely in her hand, her expression one of intense concentration, not guilt. "You did," she replied calmly, her gaze unapologetic. "But your structural engineer should be fired. The load-bearing calculations for the western facade are a complete mess. You're over-leveraging the steel supports by nearly 15%. Either you fix it, or the first major storm is going to turn your legacy into the city's most expensive wind chime." Liam was momentarily stunned. Into silence, his anger completely deflated by the sheer, unadulterated confidence of her statement. He walked over to the table, his eyes scanning the complex architectural drawings. He was a developer, a deal-maker. He understood the broad strokes, the finances, the art of the sale. But the intricate language of tensile strength and wind shear analysis was a dialect he only vaguely comprehended. Amelia pointed with the tip of her pencil to a series of calculations in the margins. "Here and here," she explained, her voice losing its defensive edge and taking on the passionate, authoritative tone of an expert in her element. "The current design prioritizes the aesthetic of the glass curtain wall over foundational integrity. It's a common mistake made by architects who are more interested in winning awards than in physics. You can achieve the same visual effect, even a better one, by redistributing the load to these internal columns and using a cantilevered truss system here." She spoke for several minutes, her hands moving over the blueprints with a fluid grace, sketching alternative lines on a piece of tracing paper with swift, precise strokes. Liam watched, utterly captivated. He had seen her defend her work before, but this was different. This wasn't a defense, it was a masterclass. He was witnessing the full force of her brilliance, a mind that saw not just lines on a page, but the very bones of a building, the way it breathed and settled and stood against the sky. In that moment, she wasn't the plus-sized woman he'd hired, the convenient solution to his problem. She was an artist, a scientist, an architect of formidable talent, and he was undeniably, profoundly impressed. A grudging respect began to form in the space between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their transactional relationship. The second rule of their contract, attending public events as a loving couple, became a stage for this new, complex dynamic. Their first major test was a charity auction at the Museum of Modern Art, a nightmarish confluence of new money, old art, and vicious gossip. Amelia, clad in an elegant, deep blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, found herself navigating the treacherous waters with an unexpected ally. Liam, seemingly sensing her discomfort, stayed close by her side, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The gesture was for show, a piece of the performance, yet it felt strangely grounding. He would murmur witty, cynical commentaries about the guests under his breath, his dry humor a surprising counterpoint to his public persona. "See that man over there?" he whispered as they examined a chaotic abstract painting. "He made his fortune selling novelty singing fish. Now he thinks he's a Medici." Amelia had to stifle a laugh, a genuine, unforced sound that surprised them both. "And what's your excuse?" she retorted, her sarcastic wit, her usual shield, now feeling more like playful banter. "My father actually had taste," Liam replied, a flicker of the old insecurity clouding his eyes for just a second. "I just have good buyers." It was the first time he had mentioned his father without the usual bravado, a small crack in the carefully maintained facade. Their performance was, by all accounts, flawless. They smiled, they mingled, they bid on an overpriced sculpture for a good cause. Liam's hand never left her back, and when they were seated for dinner, he listened with what appeared to be rapt attention. As she discussed the architectural merits of the museum's new wing with a potential investor, he saw the way the man, initially dismissive, became engrossed in her analysis, impressed by her knowledge. He felt a bizarre surge of pride, an emotion so foreign in this context that it left him momentarily disoriented. However, their fragile truce was shattered by the arrival of Julian Vance, who slithered over to their table with a predatory grace. Well, the happy couple," Julian began, his eyes sweeping over Amelia with a look of theatrical disdain. "Liam, I'm impressed. You've really committed to this project. Tell me, Amelia, is it difficult, playing the part of the adoring wife to a man who values buildings more than people?" The attack was blatant, a public test of their united front. Amelia felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation creep up her neck. Before she could formulate a scathing reply, Liam leaned forward, his own smile dangerously pleasant. "Julian, it's always a pleasure to see you," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "I find it fascinating that a man who builds condos so flimsy they could be knocked over by a strong gust of wind feels qualified to comment on the foundations of my marriage. Amelia and I are doing just fine, but thank you for your concern." He delivered the lines with a silken, dismissive charm, but Amelia, sitting beside him, could feel the rigid tension in his arm, could see the cold fire in his eyes. He was defending her. Or perhaps, she corrected herself, he was defending his investment. The line between the two was becoming terrifyingly blurred. Later that night, back in the silent sanctuary of the penthouse, the pretense fell away, leaving a raw, vibrating tension in its place. Amelia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering, indifferent skyline of Manhattan. "Thank you," she said softly, her back still to him, "for what you said to Julian." Liam loosened his bow tie, the sound of pulling silk unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "He's a parasite. It's what I do. I manage pests." His tone was dismissive, an attempt to brush off the moment, to return them to the safety of their business arrangement. But Amelia turned to face him, her expression serious. "No, it was more than that. You didn't have to, but you did." The unasked question hung between them. Why? Liam didn't have an answer, or at least not one he was willing to admit to himself. He found himself studying her, really looking at her, not as a means to an end, but as the woman standing 10 feet away from him, her intelligent eyes searching his for a truth he wasn't ready to confront. The armor she wore, her sharp wit and professional confidence, seemed to have softened, revealing a vulnerability that mirrored his own. He was drawn to it, to her, in a way that defied logic and violated the most crucial clause of their contract. "Just stick to the plan, Hayes," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "It's only 6 months." He retreated to his side of the apartment, the unspoken words chasing him down the hall. It was only 6 months, he repeated to himself, but a sinking feeling in his chest told him it might as well be a lifetime. The days bled into weeks, and a strange, unspoken rhythm developed between them. They were two celestial bodies orbiting a shared, secret sun, maintaining a careful distance while being inextricably linked by the gravity of their contract. The penthouse began to feel less like a showroom and more like a shared territory. One afternoon, Liam came home early from a disastrous meeting to find the scent of roasted garlic and herbs filling the air. He followed it to the kitchen, a space he typically only used for storing champagne and bottled water, to find Amelia, covered in a light dusting of flour, pulling a tray of rustic bread from the oven. She looked up, startled, a smudge of flour on her cheek. "I was stressed," she said by way of explanation, gesturing with the hot tray. "I bake when I'm stressed." The act was so profoundly normal, so utterly domestic, that it struck Liam as surreal. He had never seen his kitchen used for actual cooking. He found himself sitting at the marble island, watching as she sliced the warm bread, the steam rising from it. She pushed a piece toward him, along with a small dish of olive oil. "My dad taught me," she said, her voice softer now. "He used to say that you can't solve all the world's problems, but you can always make a good loaf of bread." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the simple act of sharing food creating a level of intimacy that their staged public appearances never could. It was in these quiet moments that the lines of their arrangement became most dangerously blurred, where the fake husband and the contractual wife almost felt like two real people finding solace in an impossible situation. The call came on a Tuesday morning, while Amelia was reviewing plumbing schematics. For a community center project she was designing on the side, a passion project that kept her sane. It was her sister, Chloe, her voice thin and panicked. "Mia, it's Dad. He's not good. The doctors are saying he developed an infection. They need to do another procedure, an emergency one. They're talking about ventilators and they need more money up front. A lot more." The world tilted on its axis. Amelia's carefully constructed composure crumbled, the schematics on her screen, blurring into a meaningless jumble of lines. The money from Liam, the money that was supposed to solve everything, was held in escrow, released in increments. It covered the planned surgery, but it didn't account for this, for the terrifying, unpredictable nature of a failing body. The contract, her gilded cage, suddenly felt flimsy, insufficient. The desperation she had felt in the beginning came rushing back, a suffocating tidal wave of fear and helplessness. She ended the call with a choked, promised to handle it, and sank into her chair, her head in her hands. She was trapped. To get more money, she would have to go to Liam, to renegotiate the terms of their deal, to expose the raw, terrifying depth of her vulnerability to the one man she was determined to keep at a professional distance. She would have to ask for more, to indebt herself further, not just financially, but emotionally. The thought was humiliating, a surrender she wasn't sure she could bear. But the image of her, father, frail and fighting in a hospital bed, eclipsed everything else. Her pride was a luxury she simply could not afford. She found Liam in his home gym, a sleek, sun-drenched room overlooking the Hudson River. He was mercilessly attacking a punching bag, his movements precise and powerful, sweat glistening on his bare back. He didn't hear her enter. She watched him for a moment, seeing not the polished CEO, but a man at war with his own demons trying to beat them into submission. The raw physicality of it was both intimidating and deeply revealing. When he finally stopped, breathing heavily, and turned to grab a towel, he saw her standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with a fear that cut through his own controlled anger. "What is it?" he asked, his voice still ragged from the exertion. His businesslike tone was gone, replaced by a raw, immediate concern. Amelia took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat. She explained the situation in a low, a trembling voice, hating how small and desperate she sounded. She laid out the cold, hard facts, the infection, the emergency procedure, the staggering new cost. She didn't cry. Her pride wouldn't allow it, but her voice was stripped bare of its usual defenses, leaving only the stark, painful truth of her family's crisis. "I need another $200,000, Liam," she said, the words tasting like poison. I can work it off. Extend the contract, whatever you want. Just my father." She couldn't finish the sentence. She stood before him, completely exposed, her entire world hanging on his response. It was the ultimate test of their arrangement, a moment that would redefine everything, pushing them far beyond the cold black and white print of their contract and into the messy, terrifying grey of real life. Liam's world, a universe typically governed by calculated risks and leveraged assets, narrowed to the space of his home gym and the woman standing in its doorway. Her request for $200,000 was not a negotiation. It was a plea, a raw nerve exposed. The cynical, deal-making part of his brain, the part that had inherited his father's killer instinct, flickered for a moment, running the cold calculus. This was a complication, an unforeseen liability. It was an emotional demand on a purely transactional agreement. But then he looked past the words and saw the rigid set of her shoulders, the tremor she was trying to conceal in her hands, the fierce, unshed tears shimmering in her eyes. He saw not a contractual partner leveraging a crisis, but a terrified daughter fighting for her father. The punching bag he had just been assaulting seemed like a childish indulgence compared to the real visceral battle she was facing. The ghost of his own father, wasting away in a sterile hospital bed during his final months, rose unbidden in his mind. The scent of antiseptic, the quiet beeping of machines, the suffocating helplessness. In that moment, the $50 million bet, the Abernathy deal, the entire teetering empire of Sterling Properties felt profoundly, shockingly insignificant. He tossed the towel onto a bench, his movements decisive, his internal conflict resolved with a clarity that startled him. "Get dressed," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We're going to the hospital. I'll make the call on the way." The car ride downtown was a blur of rain-streaked city lights, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers marking time in the heavy silence. Liam navigated the slick streets with an intense focus, one hand on the wheel while the other held his phone to his ear. Amelia listened, numb, as he spoke to his financial manager with a brisk, unquestionable authority. "Michael, I need you to authorize an immediate wire transfer. No, not from the corporate account, from my personal portfolio. The amount is $200,000. The recipient is New York Presbyterian Hospital. Patient. Billing? Yes, immediately. I don't care what you have to liquidate, make it happen." There was no hesitation, no mention of repayment or amended contracts. It was an act of pure, unhesitating support. When he ended the call, he didn't look at her, keeping his eyes fixed on the traffic ahead. "It's done," he said simply. The two words landed in the quiet of the car with the weight of a vow. Amelia stared at his profile, the hard lines of his jaw illuminated by the passing streetlights, and felt the carefully constructed walls around her heart begin to dissolve. This was not the act of a man executing a clause in a contract. This was the act of a man standing beside her in the trenches, a man who saw her terror and chose not to exploit it, but to shield her from it. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, a silent testament to the unexpected, terrifying kindness that was unraveling her. They spent the next 8 hours in the hushed, purgatorial limbo of the surgical waiting room. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and anxiety. Time stretched and compressed, measured in the monotonous updates from a kind-faced nurse and the endless cycle of daytime television playing on a muted screen. In this sterile, fluorescent-lit space, they were stripped of their roles. He was not the CEO of Sterling Properties, and she was not his contractual wife. They were just two people, waiting. To fill the suffocating silence, Amelia found herself talking, her voice low and raspy, telling him stories about her father. She spoke of his booming laugh, of how he taught her to ride a bike in their small Queens backyard, of his unwavering belief in her talent, even when she was a little girl, filling notebooks with fantastical drawings of impossible buildings. Liam listened, his attention absolute. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply listened, providing a quiet, solid presence that was more comforting than any words could be. At some point, watching the frantic efforts of a family in the corner, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his father's Patek Philippe watch. He stared at it for a long moment, the gold catching the harsh overhead light. "My father was a brilliant man," he said, his voice quiet and gravelly. "He built our company from nothing, but the last year of his life, the cancer ate away at everything. By the end, he didn't recognize me. All that power, all that vision, it didn't matter." He slowly unclasped the watch and, instead of putting it back on, slipped it deep into his pocket out of sight. The gesture felt monumental, a quiet shedding of an immense burden. It was an admission of a shared human fragility, a moment of profound, unarmored connection in the last place on earth either of them had expected to find it. When Amelia's sister Chloe arrived, her face etched with worry, she found Liam pouring Amelia a cup of water from the cooler, his hand hovering near her shoulder as if he wanted to offer comfort, but didn't know how. Chloe's initial stance was defensive, her eyes filled with a fierce protective suspicion of this billionaire who had so suddenly entered their lives. But as the hours wore on, she witnessed the quiet, unwavering support he offered. She saw the way he spoke to the doctors, his questions sharp and intelligent, advocating for them. She saw the way he looked at Amelia when she wasn't paying attention, an expression of unguarded concern that was impossible to fake. By the time the surgeon finally emerged, his green scrubs dotted with exhaustion, to tell them that the procedure had been a success and her father was stable, the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. In the shared, tearful relief that followed, Chloe gave Liam a small, grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement that she had misjudged him. As dawn broke over the city, they drove back to the penthouse not as business partners, but as two people who had weathered a storm together. The carefully drawn lines of their arrangement had been washed away, leaving them in a new, undefined, and far more perilous territory. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the penthouse softened. The vast, empty spaces between them began to fill with a tentative warmth. Their conversations drifted from logistical planning to genuine curiosity. He would ask about her community center project, his questions no longer tinged with the detached interest of a developer, but with an authentic fascination for her creative process. One evening, he found her sketchbook lying open on the living room sofa. He hesitated for a moment, feeling like an intruder, before his curiosity won. He picked it up, the worn leather cover soft beneath his fingers. He'd expected to see architectural drafts, but what he found was a vibrant, living world. Tucked between elegant designs for sustainable housing and innovative public spaces were charcoal portraits of people on the subway, whimsical sketches of her family, and detailed, breathtaking drawings of the city's hidden rooftop gardens. He saw the world through her eyes, a place of intricate beauty and quiet dignity. He saw her passion, her empathy, her genius. This book was the key to understanding her, a map of her soul, and as he carefully turned the pages, he felt a profound sense of admiration that had nothing to do with her utility to his business and everything to do with the remarkable woman she was. The realization that he was falling for Amelia Hayes wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was a slow, creeping dawn he was powerless to stop. This fragile new piece was shattered by a single ominous email. It arrived in Liam's inbox late one night, with no subject line and an anonymous sender. The body contained a single attachment. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The image that filled his screen was a grainy cell phone picture, clearly taken in a dimly lit bar. It showed him and Julian Vance, their heads close together, a wide, arrogant grin. On Liam's face, as he signed his name on a cocktail napkin, It was the night of the bet. A cold dread washed over him. Someone else knew. Someone was holding this over his head, a guillotine waiting to drop. His first sickening thought was that Julian had sent it, a reminder of the power he held. Or worse, what if Amelia was somehow involved? What if this was all a long con, and her family's crisis had just been a convenient way to extort more money from him? He recoiled from the thought, the disloyalty of it making him feel sick. He thought of her in the hospital, her fear raw and real. No, it wasn't her. It couldn't be. But the poison of suspicion had been planted, a tiny, insidious seed of doubt that began to cloud his newfound feelings, reminding him that their entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies and secrets. The threat was no longer abstract. It was real, it was personal, and it was closing in. The professional front of his war with Julian escalated a week later. Liam was in the Sterling Properties boardroom, presenting a revised, more conservative 5-year plan to his increasingly agitated board members. He was trying to project an aura of calm, steady leadership to reassure them that the Abernathy deal was still on track, that his recent marriage was a sign of his newfound maturity. In the middle of his presentation, the heavy oak doors swung open, and Julian Vance strode in, radiating an unapologetic smugness. He was flanked by 2 lawyers. "Sorry I'm late," Julian said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "There was some last-minute paperwork to sign." Liam's jaw tightened. "What the hell are you doing here, Julian? This is a closed board meeting." Julian smiled, a slow, triumphant stretching of his lips. He slid a folder across the polished mahogany table towards Liam. "Actually, it's my board meeting now too. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Vance Capital has acquired a 12% minority stake in Sterling Properties from a consortium of your more nervous investors. I'm your newest and I suspect most engaged board member. Please continue. I'm fascinated to hear all about this new, stable direction you're taking the company." The room fell into a stunned silence. It was a masterful power play, a Trojan horse wheeled directly into the heart of his empire. Julian was no longer an external threat. He was on the inside, with access to his financials, his strategies, and a seat at the table where he could poison the well and dismantle Liam's legacy from within. The culmination of their personal and professional war came at the annual Architectural Guild Awards Gala. It was a night that should have belonged to Amelia. Her community center design, a project she had poured her heart and soul into, was nominated for the prestigious Innovator of the Year award. She looked radiant in a flowing emerald green dress, her confidence buoyed by the genuine respect of her peers. Liam stood beside her, feeling a fierce, possessive pride that was entirely new to him. He watched her discuss the nuances of her design with the city's top architects, her passion and intelligence shining brightly. For the first time, he wasn't the center of attention, and he found he didn't mind. Seeing her in her element, celebrated for the talent he now so deeply admired, felt more satisfying than closing any deal. But their moment of quiet triumph was destined to be short-lived. Julian Vance, a major sponsor of the event, took the stage to present an award. After the requisite pleasantries, he paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on their table. "Before I announce the winner," Julian began, his voice amplified throughout the grand hall, "I'd like to acknowledge the power of unexpected partnerships. For instance, the partnership between Sterling Properties and the talented Amelia Hayes. It's truly inspiring to see a young architect's career take off so quickly after marrying into one of the city's great real estate fortunes. It just goes to show that the shortest path to a corner office is sometimes through a bedroom." The words, a vile insinuation wrapped in a veneer of congratulations, sucked the air out of the room. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the audience. Amelia froze, the color draining from her face. It was a direct assault, not just on her marriage, but on her professional integrity, designed to reduce her years of hard work and brilliant talent to a sordid Transaction in front of the very people whose respect she had fought so hard to earn. A white-hot, blinding rage, purer and more potent than anything he had ever felt, erupted inside Liam. It wasn't the calculated anger of a business rival. It was the primal fury of a man watching someone he loved being attacked. Before he even knew what he was doing, he was on his feet and storming towards the stage. He didn't just grab the microphone, he ripped it from Julian's hand. The feedback shrieked. Through the speakers, a sound that matched the chaos in his head. "Get off my stage!" He snarled at Julian, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He then turned to the stunned audience, his eyes blazing. What you just heard was the sound of a small, jealous man who wouldn't know integrity if it redesigned his entire pathetic portfolio of glass boxes. Amelia Hayes earned her nomination tonight and every other accolade she's ever received through sheer, undeniable brilliance. She is the most talented architect I have ever met, and the idea that she would need anyone, least of all me, to advance her career is a pathetic joke. The only person in this room who got to where they are by riding on someone else's coattails is you, Julian. Now get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret. The entire room was silent, paralyzed by the raw, unscripted fury of his defense. He had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his own professional life. Consequences be damned. In that moment, with the whole city watching, he didn't care about his reputation, the investors, or the bet. He cared about the look of stunned, fragile hope that was dawning in Amelia's eyes. It was a point of no return. He had chosen his side, and there was no going back. The ride home was thick with an electric, unspoken tension. The performative aspect of their relationship had been incinerated, leaving something raw and real in its place. When the penthouse door closed behind them, sealing them in, their silent world high above the city, Amelia finally turned to him, her eyes glistening. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You could have lost everything. Abernathy will hear about this by morning." Liam stepped closer to her, his own adrenaline-fueled anger giving way to a startlingly clear sense of purpose. "I don't care about Abernathy," he said, his voice low and intense. "I don't care about the deal. I care about what he said to you." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. It was a breach of every rule they had set, a crossing of a line they had both sworn to respect. The air crackled between them, charged with 6 months of unspoken words and repressed feelings. Her sarcastic armor was gone, and his arrogant facade had crumbled, leaving two vulnerable people standing in the wreckage. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear, the hope, the desire. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, and, for a moment, the entire world consisted only of the space between their lips. Just as the fragile, beautiful moment was about to crystallize, his phone, which a board member had been frantically buzzing all evening, lit up on the console table beside them. A new notification appeared, a link to a notorious city gossip blog. The headline in bold, cruel letters screamed across the top of the screen: "Sterling's new bride already straying. Architect Amelia Hayes caught in cozy rendezvous with mystery man." Below it was a photograph, expertly taken from a distance. It showed Amelia on a park bench, laughing, her head close to another man's as he handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers. The context was innocent. It had been taken 2 weeks ago, when she had met her cousin for lunch to give him a birthday gift. But the image itself, artfully cropped and presented without explanation, was damning. It was Julian's retaliation, swift and devastatingly effective. Liam stared at the screen, the image burning into his retinas. The passionate defense, the protective instinct, the tender, nascent love he had just acknowledged, all of it curdled in his stomach, instantly poisoned by the anonymous email, by Julian's infiltration of his board. by the fundamental lie their entire relationship was built on. The seed of doubt, planted weeks ago, bloomed into a monstrous, thorny vine of betrayal. He looked from the damning photo on his phone to the woman standing before him, her face still, soft, with a hope he now felt was a lie. And a cold, familiar fury began to build, eclipsing everything else. The fragile moment of near confession shattered into a million poisoned shards. Liam shoved the phone into her personal space, the glowing screen a grotesque testament to his spiraling paranoia. The image of her with another man, laughing and intimate, was a brand on his soul. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice a low, chilling echo of the warmth it had held only seconds before. All the vulnerability, all the nascent tenderness had vanished, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the ruthless CEO, the cynical gambler who had just been played for a fool. Amelia stared at the screen, a wave of nauseating disbelief washing over her. It was a picture of her and her cousin David, taken on his birthday. The innocent meeting was twisted into something ugly and clandestine. "Liam, that's my cousin," she stammered, her mind struggling to catch up with the velocity of his sudden transformation. "It was his birthday. I was giving him a gift. It's nothing." But her words were like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. He wasn't listening. He was trapped in the prison of the bet, seeing every action through the warped lens of deceit and transaction. "Your cousin," he repeated, the words dripping with a corrosive sarcasm. How incredibly convenient. Was this part of the plan all along, Amelia? Was the hospital crisis just a way to soften me up before your accomplice made his move? Tell me, what was the next step? Blackmail? The accusation was so monstrous, so deeply unfair after the raw, shared vulnerability of the past few weeks, that Amelia's shock curdled into a white-hot fury. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "After everything, after I let you see my family, my father, you think I would do this?" Liam let out a harsh, bitter laugh, pacing the room like a caged animal. "Why shouldn't I? Our entire marriage is a lie. I defended you tonight. I torpedoed a $90 million investment and made an enemy of every powerful person in that room. For you. I made a complete fool of myself because for one insane second I actually believed this was real. And this is how you repay me? By letting my rival, the man who wants to destroy me, plaster your infidelity all over the internet?" The injustice of it all stole her breath. He was twisting his own noble act into a weapon against her. "You think I'm working?" "With Julian," she cried, her voice rising. "You, the man who bought a wife to win a bet against him. You want to talk about betrayal, Liam? You want to talk about lies? Our entire life is a lie you invented on a cocktail napkin." In his rage, he stormed into his office and returned with the framed marriage contract, the anchor object of their cold reality, and slammed it onto the table between them. "This is what's real, Amelia. This is all it ever was, a business deal, and you have just violated the terms." That was the final blow. Seeing the cold, legal document that had defined and imprisoned her for months, she finally broke. With a cry of frustration and heartbreak, she swept her arm across the table, sending the frame crashing to the polished concrete floor. The glass shattered, exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces, the sound as final and irrevocable as a gunshot. "That contract is the only thing you've ever truly been committed to," she yelled, tears of rage and sorrow now streaming down her face. "You hide behind it because you're a coward, terrified of feeling anything real. You didn't defend me tonight, Liam. You defended your pride, your investment. I was a fool to ever think I was anything more than another one of your assets." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked with a rigid, dignified gait towards her wing of the apartment, the sound of splintered glass crunching under her heels. She packed with a frantic, desperate energy, throwing her clothes and books into suitcases, her movements fueled by a profound and shattering heartbreak. She found the pre-signed divorce papers her lawyer had insisted upon, a fail-safe in case of a breach. With a steady hand, She signed her name, the ink a final, definitive severing of their bond. She left the papers on the broken frame of the contract, a fitting tombstone for their arrangement. When Liam finally ventured out of his office, the anger having cooled into a familiar, desolate emptiness, he found the signed papers, the shattered glass, and a silence more deafening than any argument. He walked to her suite. The closet was empty. The scent of jasmine and tea was already fading. He was alone, and he realized with a sickening certainty that he had just lost far, far more than a bet. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Just as Amelia had predicted, word of Liam's public outburst at the gala reached Abernathy, who formally withdrew his investment offer, citing Liam's instability. The article with the doctored photos went viral, painting Sterling Properties as a circus of scandal. The board, led by a triumphant Julian, convened an emergency meeting and delivered an ultimatum: resign as CEO or be forcibly removed. Liam sat in his cavernous, silent penthouse for 3 days, drinking expensive scotch and watching his empire crumble. The space, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a mausoleum. Every empty corner, every silent room, screamed her absence. He would see her forgotten teacup on a counter or find a stray bobby pin on the floor, and the ache in his chest would become a physical, debilitating pain. He had won countless deals, vanquished numerous rivals, and built a fortune on his ability to remain detached. But in driving Amelia away, he had made the worst deal of his life. The truth, stark and undeniable, finally crystallized in his alcohol-soaked mind. The thought of losing his company was painful, but the reality of losing Amelia was unbearable. He had been so obsessed with honoring his father's legacy of success that he had failed to build a life of his own, a life with any meaning. He had treated the most valuable person he had ever met as a commodity, and in doing so had proven himself utterly bankrupt. Amelia, meanwhile, had taken refuge in her old, cramped apartment in Queens, the rooftop garden that had once been her sanctuary now feeling like a cage. Her heart felt like it had been systematically demolished, leaving nothing but rubble. Chloe tried to comfort her, bringing her food she wouldn't eat and offering words of encouragement she couldn't hear. "He's a monster, Mia. You're better off without him," Chloe would say. But Amelia knew it wasn't that simple. She had seen the other side of him, the man who sat with her in a hospital waiting room, the man who listened to stories about her father, the man whose eyes, for a fleeting moment, had held a look of such profound admiration that it had taken her breath away. That was the man she had allowed herself to fall for, and the memory of him was a ghost that haunted her every waking moment. Her father, now home and slowly recovering, could see the profound sadness in her eyes. "You loved him, didn't you?" he asked one afternoon, his voice still weak but his gaze as perceptive as ever. Amelia could only nod, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. She had entered a fake marriage to save her father's life, only to have it completely destroy her own heart. A week after the shattering, Liam's pragmatic lawyer, George, came to the penthouse with a lifeline. It was an offer from a notoriously ruthless private equity firm. They would buy out the board, oust Julian, and stabilize the company, saving it from ruin. The price was steep. They would install their own CEO, demand massive layoffs, and pivot the company's focus to cheap, high-profit residential blocks, abandoning any pretense of architectural vision. It was a buy deal with the devil, a way to save the sterling name while gutting its soul. As Liam sat at his desk, the pen hovering over the contract that would salvage his professional life, his eyes fell on the one thing Amelia had left behind in her haste, her leather-bound sketchbook. He picked it up, the object a tangible link to her, to the brief period when his life had felt vibrant and full of purpose. He opened it to the pages detailing her community center project. He saw the rooftop gardens, designed for elderly residents, the sensory learning spaces for children, the sustainable energy systems. He saw not a building, but a belief in a better world. It was a project built on empathy, integrity, and brilliance, all the qualities he had betrayed. In that moment, he made a decision. He threw the pen down. "I'm not signing," he told a stunned George. "There's another way, a better way." He was going to bet on Amelia one last time, not as part of a wager, but as an act of faith. He would use what was left of his personal fortune to fund her project himself and make it the new centerpiece of his company, transforming it from the ground up. It was a reckless, insane gamble that could lead to his complete financial ruin. It was also the only choice he could live with. The final, decisive battle took place not in a boardroom, but in the formal, amphitheater-style chamber of the New York City Planning Board. The meeting was to determine the zoning and approval for the most important redevelopment project in the city, the very project Liam was now staking his future on. The room was packed with city officials, journalists, and industry figures. Julian Vance was seated in the front row, a smug, predatory look on his face. Confident he was about to witness Liam's final public execution, Liam had called Amelia and asked her to be there, his voice on the phone devoid of its usual arrogance, replaced by a quiet, desperate plea. "Please, Amelia, it's about your design. Just come. You don't have to speak to me. Just be there." Wary but intrigued, she had agreed, and now sat in the back of the chamber, her heart a tangled knot of apprehension and residual pain. When his name was called, Liam walked to the podium. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and steady. He nodded to the technician to turn on the projector, but instead of the slick corporate presentation everyone expected, he placed Amelia's worn, leather-bound sketchbook under the lens. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady, resonating through the silent chamber. "My name is Liam Sterling, and I am here today to present the future of Sterling Properties. But before I do that, I have to tell you the truth about my past." He took a deep breath, his eyes finding Amelia's in the back of the room. "6 months ago, I was a different man, a man who valued stock prices over people, a man who was so terrified of failing to live up to his father's legacy that he became a caricature of a leader. I was so desperate to save my company's reputation that I entered into a bet with my rival, Mr. Vance." A shocked gasp rippled through the room. Julian's face went white with fury. Liam continued, his voice unwavering, a raw and public confession. "I made a wager that I could stay married for 6 months. To do this, I entered into a contractual marriage with the most brilliant architect I have ever known, offering her money to solve a family medical crisis in exchange for her playing the part of my wife. The woman I chose was Amelia Hayes." He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "It was a cruel, shameful, and unforgivable act, and it is the single greatest mistake of my life." He then clicked to the first page of her sketchbook, her elegant, powerful designs flooding the large screen behind him. He didn't talk about profit margins or square footage. He talked about her vision. He pointed out the details he had spent the last week memorizing, the community integration, the sustainable materials, the focus on human dignity. "This isn't my project," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is hers. And while I was busy trying to build a legacy out of glass and steel, she was designing a future built on community and hope. I was too blind and arrogant to see the genius right in front of me, not just for my company, but for my own life. She was never an asset. She was the architect of a better version of me, one I didn't deserve, but one I am now spending the rest of my life trying to become." He turned from the podium and looked directly at Amelia, the entire room, the entire city fading away. "I am so deeply, profoundly sorry, Amelia, for the bet, for not trusting you, for breaking your heart. This project, her project," he said, turning back to the board, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction, "is the new foundation of Sterling Properties. It is a company that will now stand for the same integrity, brilliance, and humanity that she embodies," he finished, leaving the room in a state of stunned, absolute silence. He had just committed professional suicide, laying his company's and his own sins bare for the world to see, all in a desperate, final gesture of atonement. The silence was broken by the chairwoman of the planning board, a formidable woman known for her no-nonsense attitude. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her expression unreadable. "In 20 years on this board, I have never heard a presentation like that." Julian, seeing his victory slipping away, jumped to his feet. "This is a farce, a pathetic, desperate stunt to manipulate this board." But the chairwoman held up a hand, silencing him. She was looking at the designs on the screen, a slow, appreciative smile forming on her face. "It may be a stunt," she conceded, her eyes shifting to Liam, "but it is also the most compelling and visionary urban development project I have seen in a decade. And frankly, a little more of that kind of accountability from the developers in this city wouldn't be such a bad thing." The project was approved. In the ensuing chaos of reporters and stunned board members, Liam and Amelia found each other. The space between them was no longer filled with anger or lies, but with the raw, terrifying, beautiful truth. "Liam," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "I know it's not enough," he said quietly, "but it's a start." She looked at the man before her, a man who had publicly sacrificed his reputation to validate her worth, who had confessed his deepest flaws to honor her. And in his eyes, she saw not the cocky mogul, but a man who was humbled, remorseful, and finally, truly, worthy of her. "Yes," she whispered, a small, hopeful smile breaking through her tears. "It's a start." 1 year later, the late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over the rooftop garden of the newly completed Hayes Community Center. The project was a resounding success, a beloved new landmark that had revitalized the entire neighborhood. Families laughed in the plaza below, children played in the interactive water fountains Amelia had designed, and elderly residents tended to the vibrant flower beds. Amelia stood on the balcony, leaning against Liam, a prestigious Architect of the Year award, the one she had truly earned, resting on a table beside them. His arm was wrapped securely around her, his touch now as familiar and comforting as her own heartbeat. He had spent the last year not just rebuilding his company, but rebuilding her trust, piece by painstaking piece, with patience, honesty, and a love that was quiet, steady, and unwavering. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. On his wrist, his father's watch no longer seemed like a burden, but simply a part of who he was. They had renewed their vows 2 months prior, not in a grand ballroom filled with strangers, but in this very garden, surrounded by their family and closest friends, with a new contract they had written themselves, its only clauses being love, honor, and partnership. He turned her to face him, his eyes filled with a love so deep and genuine it still made her heart ache. "I love you, Amelia Hayes Sterling," he murmured, his voice soft against the gentle breeze. "I love you more than any building, any deal, any legacy." She smiled, her own heart full to bursting. "I know," she said, rising on her toes to meet his lips in a slow, sweet kiss, a kiss that held the promise of 1,000 quiet, beautiful, and very real tomorrows.